Hello, listeners. Needless to say, we are living in a modern era, an era of tremendous progress and advancement. And undoubtedly, man's zest to acquire more and more knowledge has just not led to his enlightenment, but also has helped him a lot in curbing many evil practices which continued to exist in our society for a long time in the name of traditions and rituals. Well, to name some: child marriage, dowry system, atrocities casted to a widow, girls not allowed to go to schools and becoming literate, ill treatment of women, and gender discrimination, and the list may go on and on. But as the times changed, more exposure happened. The outlook of the society underwent change, and to some level, man adopted a more balanced attitude towards the fair sex. Now a woman goes out, she learns, she's getting educated, she's expressive about her talents, and of course, making a place for herself in the society. This change is worth admiration. But as compared to the huge population growth of the country, is still the right to education seems a distant dream for many. And the reason is as simple as deep-rooted and outdated perspective about imparting education to a girl child, and more horrifying is stopping them to come to this world. Yes, you have guessed it very right. I'm talking about one of the most burning and sensitive issues: female feticide. The paradox lies in the fact that on one hand, we talk of women empowerment, women liberation, women education, and on the other hand, we stand mute, ignoring the brutal killing of female fetus, which is happening so rampantly across. The latest technologies are there to smoothen man's life. The success and progress attained in the medical field is simply to make a man's life better. But in his temptation to fulfill his selfish desires, very often man has been found misusing them. Sex detection techniques have been thoroughly misused and have aggravated female feticide to a very large extent. Long before these techniques were developed, the cruel idea of treating a girl child as an unwanted stuff, as a lump of garbage, is still ruled the minds of many owing to lack of education or the blind faith in the name of rituals and traditions. And then the act had been more heinous. The moment it was declared by the midwife that a girl child has taken birth, the fragile soul was put to sleep forever. Either she was buried, or she was thrown into the well, or strangled to death. And then man discovered better ways to continue with the practice. Some of the worst gender ratios indicating gross violation of women's rights are found in South and East Asian countries such as India and China. The determination of the sex of the fetus by ultrasound scanning, amniocentesis, and in vitro fertilization has aggravated this situation. No moral or ethical principle supports such a procedure for gender identification. The situation is further worsened by a lack of awareness of women's rights and by the indifferent attitude of medical professionals. Actually, the available legislation for prevention of sex determination needs a strict implementation alongside the launching of programs aimed at altering attitudes, including those prevalent in medical profession. The killing of women exists in various forms in societies the world over. However, our society displays some unique and particularly brutal versions such as dowry deaths and sati. Female feticide is an extreme manifestation of violence against women. Female fetuses are selectively aborted after prenatal sex determination, thus avoiding the birth of girls. As a result of selective abortion, between 35 and 40 million girls and women are missing from the Indian population. In some parts of the country, the sex ratio of girls to boys has dropped to less than 800:1,000. The United Nations has expressed serious concern about the situation. The sex ratio has altered consistently in favor of boys since the beginning of the 20th century. And the effect has been more pronounced in the states of Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi. It was in these states that private fetal sex determination clinics were first established and the practice of selective abortion became popular from the late 1970s. Worryingly, The trend is far stronger in urban rather than rural areas and among literate rather than illiterate women, exploding the myth that growing affluence and a spread of basic education alone will result in the erosion of gender bias. The adverse sex ratio has been linked with the low status of women in our society and communities. The status of women in society can be determined by their education, health, economic role, presence in the professions and management, and decision-making power within the family. It is deeply influenced by the beliefs and values of society. If polygamy gives women fewer rights than men, on the other hand, preference for the main child is likewise deeply enshrined in belief and practice. The birth of a son is regarded as essential, and many prayers and lavish offerings are made in the hope of a male child. Modern medical technology is used in the service of this religion-driven devaluing of women and girls. The practice of dowry has spread nationwide to communities and castes in which it had never been the custom, fueled by consumerism and emulation of upper caste practices. It is estimated that a dowry death occurs in India every 93 minutes. The need for a dowry for girl children and the ability to demand a dowry for boys exerts considerable economic pressure on families to use any means to avoid having girls who are seen as a liability. Ironically, posters have been seen in urban areas advertising sex determination tests which read, "It is better to pay 500 rupees now than rupees 50,000 in dowry later." And this is really pathetic. Women and developments in reproductive technology abortion was legalized in India in 1971, Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, to strengthen humanitarian values. Pregnancy can be aborted if it is a result of sexual assault, contraceptive failure, if the baby would be severely handicapped, or if the mother is incapable of bearing a healthy child. Amniocentesis was introduced in 1975 to detect fetal abnormalities, but it soon began to be used for determining the sex of the baby. Ultrasound scanning, being a non-invasive technique, quickly gained popularity and is now available in some of the most remote rural areas. Both techniques are now being used for sex determination with the intention of abortion if the fetus turns out to be female. These methods do not involve manipulation of genetic material to select the sex of a baby. Recent preconception gender selection, however, includes pre-implantation gender discrimination of the embryo and in vitro fertilization to ensure the birth of a baby of the desired sex without undergoing abortion. Ironically, it is being used to avoid giving birth to a girl child. Given the lower value placed on women, prenatal sex determination with the intention of preventing female births must be viewed as a manifestation of violence against women, a violence of the human rights. The pregnant woman, though often equally anxious to have a boy, is frequently pressurized to undergo such procedures. Many women suffer from psychological trauma as a result of forcibly undergoing repeated abortions. More generally, demographers warn that in the next 20 years, there will be a shortage of brides in the marriage market, mainly because of the adverse juvenile sex ratio, combined with an overall decline in fertility. While fertility is declining more rapidly in urban and educated families, nevertheless, the preference for male children remains strong. For these families, modern medical technologies are within easy reach. Thus, selective abortion and sex selection are becoming more common. In 1994, the Government of India passed the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, that is Prohibition of Sex Selection, Act with the aim of preventing female feticide. It was later amended and replaced in 2002 by the Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, Regulation and Prevention of Misuse Act. The Act has a central and state-level supervisory board, an appropriate authority and supporting advisory committee. The function of the supervisory board is to oversee, monitor and make amendments to the provisions of the Act. Appropriate authority provides registration and conducts the administrative work involved in an inspection, investigation and penalizing of defaulters. Contravening the provisions of the Act can lead to a fine of Rs 10,000 and up to 3 years imprisonment for a first offence, with greater times and longer terms of imprisonment for repeat offenders. The appropriate authority informs the central or state medical council to take action against medical professionals, leading to suspension or the striking off of practitioners found guilty of contravening the provisions of the Act. The removal of this practice in our society is a serious challenge. It must involve the advocacy of a scientific, rational, and humanist approach. The empowerment of women and a strengthening of women's rights through campaigning against practices such as dowry and ensuring a strict implementation of existing legislation, ensuring the development of and access of good healthcare services, inculcating a strong ethical code of conduct among medical professionals beginning with their training as undergraduates. Simple methods of complaint registration accessible to the poorest and most vulnerable women. Wide publicization in the media of the scale and seriousness of the practice. NGOs should take a key role in educating the public on the matter. Regular assessment of indicators of the status of women in society, such as sex ratio and female mortality, literacy, and economic participation. It is only by a combination of monitoring, education campaigns, and effective legal implementation that the deep-seated attitudes and practices against women and girls can be eroded. Thank you.